Dan Hurley's going to have another All-American at UConn this year, but hold on. It's not going to be who you might think. That and the rest of our 2025-26 bold predictions all coming up on today's Locked On College Basketball.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there where your host, this is my good buddy, Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Special shout out to all the everydayers, all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord as well. We're so glad you're all here. If you want to join us in the ramp up to the season in the Discord, that link is in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if it wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Check it out today. Andy, coming up on the show, one of our favorite shows of every offseason. It is time for our bold predictions, guaranteed to go wrong. You guys, if a prediction is bold, it shouldn't happen, right? Like it should be less likely than likely to happen. And that's what these bold predictions hopefully are. If we get it right, well, congrats to us. But we do try to base them all in some sort of like, here's why that could happen, right? We're not just throwing stuff against the wall. Legitimately, like we're going to give you scenarios that there is a world in which they could happen. By the way, 2 weeks to the day until the regular season starts. But this coming weekend, you guys, there is going to be an exhibition slate that would make your mama cook you a cake. I don't know even what that means, but that's what came out. So Andy and I each have 3 bold predictions for you today. We'll each do one in each segment. Andy is going to kick us off. Andy, let's get going with our 25-26 bold predictions. Take it away.
Starting in the Big East with my first prediction here, talking about UConn big man Tarris Reed. I think Tarris Reed is going to be an All-American this upcoming season, and I've seen a handful of lists, a handful of places that have him as like outside the top 10 players in the Big East, outside the top 15 or 20 big men in the country. And to me, it just feels like we're not looking at what we've seen as a common trend for Dan Hurley's teams, where these big men, they often do, the center rotations. They have 2 guys who play 20, 25-ish minutes per game. And we saw that with Adama Sanogo and Klingon and Johnson, and last year with Johnson and Reed. And I'm sure to some extent we'll see that again this year. But what we've also seen pretty consistently is these bigs who are kind of the backup in their first year really blossom in that second year in the system. And Tarris Reed's a guy who comes over from Michigan, played extremely well last year for a UConn team that obviously had a handful of issues and didn't perform at the level people expected them to. But Tarris Reed was flat out awesome for this team last year. He played exactly 19.9 minutes per game. So basically exactly half of every game. He averaged just under 10 points, over 7 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks. Again, that was in 20 minutes per game. I suspect with Samson Johnson gone on a roster that is younger, there's still some phenomenal talent. Obviously, they bring in great players in the transfer portal like Silas Demery and Malachi Smith and others, and some great freshmen coming in. But Tarris Reed is going to have a bigger offensive role on this team in my mind. And I think the combination of high-level scoring, efficiency around the rim, great rebounder, good shot blocker, I think all of that puts Reed in a position where he's going to be one of the most productive on a minute-by-minute basis front court players in all of college basketball. Like, to me, he's not that much different in terms of production than somebody like Graham Ike, who's very much in the conversation as an All-American. The difference it really is that Reed is a significantly better defensive player than Graham Ike. And so, to me, the only big in the Big East who I feel confident is probably better or going to be more impactful than Tarris Reed is Zubi Ejiofor over at St. John's. But Reed is a guy that could very much be in the conversation as a second-team All-American, third-team All-American, maybe if the stars align perfectly and he's able to play, 28, 30 minutes a game, maybe even a first-team All-American. And I know that there's some talented young players in the front court for UConn, Eric Ryba in particular, but to me, I suspect that Tarris Reed is going to put up really big numbers. He's going to be more impactful this year than people are maybe projecting him to be, or maybe thinking that he's going to be. And while first team All-American is certainly a stretch, being in the All-American conversation feels plausible for me for this young man.
So, Andy, does this mean that do you think there will be other UConn All-Americans, or are you saying I think Tarris Reed is UConn's most important or best player, or MVP maybe is the best way to define it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think Silas Demery is going to put up huge numbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the All-American conversation. I think more what I'm saying is that UConn might have multiple players in that conversation, which would probably put them in a position where they are the front runner in the Big East, outside of, or alongside St. John's, maybe even in front of St. John's, who has some questions about their backcourt that are still, have me skeptical. I do have UConn number one in this conference. And I think that if Demery plays at the level he's expected to or capable of, and Tarris Reed has a monster season, that puts them in a position where Alex Caravan can be that third guy or fourth guy, which is where he's better. He is better as that third or fourth option than when he's been asked to be number one or number two. And with those guys, and with Solo Ball, who I know there's a lot of really big excitement about him as well. Like, this is the kind of UConn roster that has 3, 4, 5 talented players who can all kind of beat you on a given night. And that's what makes this team dangerous and scary, and what has Danny Hurley back in the conversation as a potential national championship squad after a disappointing year last year.
Yeah, I was going to say, Andy, it sounds like if all this plays out the way you're saying, we could be talking about 3 championships in 4 years for the Huskies, and that would be absolutely bonkers. But I tell you what, sir, that's not going to happen because of my bold prediction, number 1. Are you ready for it?
Hit me.
Okay. Braden Smith is the preseason National Player of the Year frontrunner, the odds-on favorite, whatever. Here's the prediction. Braden Smith does not win National Player of the Year, but Purdue breaks the Big Ten streak and gets that national championship, the first one for Coach Matt Painter. Andy, here's my thinking. I mean, obviously, it doesn't feel that bonkers to say Purdue's going to win the national championship. They're the preseason number 1 team. I get that, and I hear it. It's also not that bonkers to say Braden Smith's not going to win National Player of the Year because, yes, while he is the preseason favorite, there are a lot of players in college basketball, Andy. I don't know if you're aware of that. And so, right. But to pair these together, I think it does make some sense. And the reason I put it this way is because I think Braden Smith not winning National Player of the Year is probably actually a really good thing for Purdue's championship hopes, because it means he hasn't had to take as much of the weight on his own shoulders. I still think his numbers are going to be phenomenal. I still think he will be All-American, but I think there are going to be other players with better individual numbers for other good teams that will probably get those accolades. But in my mind, Braden continues to do what he needs to do as a distributor, as a scorer, but there's going to be more from a senior Fletcher Lawyer. There's going to be more from a Trey Kaufman-Wren going back to his natural 4, the power forward position, which Matt Painter's talked about all offseason long, with what Oscar Clough's going to be able to do, with what, just everything they've got there. Guys filling these roles with Daniel Jacobson coming back from injury. Like, dude, it's just, and we've got our Israeli, for what's his name? I always forget it.
Meyer.
Meyer. Good grief, dude. Like, so excited. I just feel like all the pieces are there. And so all of this for me is not about Braden Smith not being great. It's just about a diffusion of offensive balance for Purdue, which is going to make them a more potent team. This starting backcourt, dude, they have the taste of this in their mouth. Remember, guys, they were freshmen on that team that lost in the first round as the second ever 1-16. They were sophomore starting backcourt mates on the team that lost to UConn 2 years ago in the national championship game. And then they were fine last year. Where were they? A 4 seed? And here we are. Senior year for Braden Smith, senior year for Fletcher Lawyer, and they're going to go out and do it. And I think if I'm Braden Smith, I would say I'm more than fine with this bold prediction. I would definitely trade a national championship for National Player of the Year.
Yeah, I could absolutely see how this could happen, where Smith has a very good year, but somebody else has a better year, more individual accolades, better numbers, and maybe a more surprising team result, and that player wins National Player of the Year. But Smith just continues to carry this team with his scoring as well as his distribution. But you have, Lawyer has the best season of his career. Kaufman-Wren has the best season of his career. Clough fits seamlessly. Meyer fits seamlessly. Other role players, CJ Cox, guys like that step up and play well. And this team is just a freight train all season long. Like that feels very plausible and doable to me. I will say if Purdue wins the Big Ten by a couple of games, even if Smith's numbers are not, maybe where other players are, I think it'd be hard for the voters to not still give it to Smith, considering the overwhelming favorite that he is at this point. But I could see a reality where Smith is still good and somebody else just happens to clip him.
Here's what would be funny, Andy, to your point. What if the bold prediction had been TKR wins National Player of the Year instead of Braden Smith and Purdue? But here's the other thing with that. They could easily split votes in this thing too, right? Like that's always something to keep in mind. Anyway, I like those first two bold predictions, Andy. A lot of fun, and two teams that should be right at the top of the sport this year in both UConn and Purdue.
Yeah, and two guys, we'll see if Reed's in that conversation, but certainly Smith will be in that conversation. But Isaac does not believe he's going to be National Player of the Year, but he's going to tell you who he does in fact think is going to be the National Player of the Year. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you'll get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets that you can use all across the app. And when you use FanDuel, whether it's parlays or player props or even jumping in on the action live, it makes watching football even more exciting since you've got a little bit riding on that action. So whether you're a casual fan or you're somebody who loves diving deep into the stats, FanDuel makes that game day experience so much better. Since we're talking Wooden Award odds, Isaac was right. Smith is the overwhelming favorite at FanDuel plus 400, followed by freshman Darren Peterson at Kansas at plus 1,000, and Texas Tech's JT Toppin at plus 1,100. I'll toss out that Tarris Reed does in fact have odds on him at plus 12,000. So if you were convinced that he is that level of player this year, then what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app and get started today. Folks, one of the tools that helps make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly Open Phone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard me talk about before, just with the new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. And Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying two phones around or having to rely on a landline. Their built-in AI agent is a game changer. It can answer after-hours calls, capture leads, and keep business moving even when you're off the clock. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly Open Phone. Get started for free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That's QUO.com/lockedoncollege. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, Isaac, continuing our bold predictions here. We talked about Tarris Reed as a potential All-American, and then you talked about Braden Smith potentially not winning the National Player of the Year, although that could be a good thing for Purdue. But Isaac, why don't you tell us who you do in fact think will win the National Player of the Year award if it's not going to be Braden Smith?
Andy, it's Donovan Dent. While it's not Braden Smith, Donovan Dent is going to win the National Player of the Year, transitioning from New Mexico to UCLA for the Mick Bruins. And by the way, let me double dip on this bold prediction because Donovan Dent is going to win the National Player of the Year for a UCLA team that makes their first non-COVID edition Final Four since Ben Howland went to 3 straight 06 through 08, Andy. And here's part of why this is. I thought UCLA was fine last year, but it's one of those teams that was like, they were good, but like a year and a piece away. Like I love Tyler Bilodeau, for example, but man, him being the second leading scorer with an absolute dude ahead of him. Whereas last year, he kind of was he their leading scorer last year?
I think he was. Yeah.
Yes. At like 13-5. Yeah. And like, if he can do that, but as the second leading scorer, and then you also bring back Eric Ailey, you bring back Sky Clark that can help run the show alongside Donovan Dent, I mean, that two-headed backcourt, dude, is dangerous. You got Trent Perry that's going to take a step forward. I think Xavier Booker might be the kind of X factor in how far the ceiling goes, especially with the Daimara off to Michigan, things of that nature, Andy. But all that to say, you take Donovan Dent, who was already just superhuman at New Mexico. You bring him here. And one of the things I like that you really talked about Tarris Reed in the last segment was the two-way nature of what he's going to do. I recently heard an interview with Mick Cronin where he was talking about, man, like Donovan's just special. And when he said, look, basically like, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I really know what I'm doing defensively. And if and when I can get him to buy in or to fully get all our defensive concepts, sky's the limit. Sky Clark. And so I just think when you take who he already is offensively, and I really do think Mick's going to let him cook, right? I know Mick Cronin has this reputation of he's a defensive guy, so guys can't thrive offensively. Jaime Jaquez says hi, right? Like, what are we doing? And so I think when you take what now will be two-way incredible Donovan Dent, look out, dude. The sky's the limit. You know, Andy, I'm really bullish on UCLA anyway. I just think great things are in store for the Bruins this year.
A couple of things on this that I would point out. First, I'm going to ask you this directly. If you think Donovan Dent's going to be National Player of the Year over Braden Smith, does that also mean you think Donovan Dent's going to be the Big Ten Player of the Year over Braden Smith? Because it feels very hard for me to imagine Smith not winning Big Ten Player of the Year. But if UCLA, I mean, if Dent's going to be this caliber of player, which by the way, I think is very possible and doable, that could throw a wrench in the fact that Smith kind of seems like a shoo-in for that award, but may in fact not win it.
That's a great question because it's like, it like almost by definition, the National Player of the Year should also be his Conference Player of the Year. But there's like the team success and the player numbers and all that at play. So I guess by definition, I got to say, yeah, I'm saying Donovan Dent's going to be Big Ten Player of the Year. I think that's weird, but look, I'm going to own my bold prediction. And so, yeah, Donovan Dent is also your Big Ten Player of the Year.
The other thing I really wanted to point out that is just humorous is that the player with the third highest odds to win National Player of the Year is Donovan Dent's former teammate at New Mexico, JT Toppin, and the fact that we're picking another former New Mexico player to win National Player of the Year, testament to the devastation that has happened to New Mexico's roster to have lost both Toppin and Dent, who are unquestionably candidates to win National Player of the Year this year, regardless of whether either of them actually do. I like this prediction. Donovan Dent's going to be really, really good at UCLA. And you mentioned Jaime Jaquez. I would also, on that same team, mention Johnny Juzang, at least on that Final Four team, because Juzang kind of had the ball in his hands a lot and really had a lot of freedom in a lot of ways that I think people kind of look at these last couple of years where UCLA didn't have great guard play, and Mick Cronin was pretty critical of his guard play these last few years. And it kind of looked like, Mick Cronin's offense or system sort of stymies this development offensively for these guards. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think if Dent were to really struggle this year, then I think we might have to have that conversation a bit more earnestly of, is this a Mick Cronin issue? But I think it was more of a talent issue with those guards the last few years. And I think that we're going to see that pretty clearly play out this year with Dent having a massive season offensively. And if he shows that improvement defensively, he is very clearly in the conversation for all for certainly for all Big Ten, certainly for All American, potentially even for Player of the Year. I don't think it's out of the question, especially if UCLA does, as you predicted here, have an opportunity to get a top seed and make a run all the way to the Final Four. Then, yeah, I think Donovan Dent could very much so be in that conversation.
Yes, let's make it happen. All right, Andy, what is your second bold prediction for the 25-26 college basketball season?
Going over to the ACC, talking about the 4 new head coaches in the Atlantic Coast Conference. We've talked about them a handful of times. The new coaches at Miami, at Virginia, at NC State, and at Florida State. And my prediction here, I think this is the boldest of my 3, is that Miami and new coach Jay Lucas finishes higher in the conference standings than any of the other teams with new head coaches. So higher than Virginia, higher than Florida State, and perhaps most bold, higher than NC State in the standings. And look, I love this Miami roster. Obviously, Jay Lucas is unproven as a head coach. And when you compare him as a head coach and the accolades that he, has not had an opportunity to get compared to the accolades of somebody like Will Wade or somebody like Ryan Odom, who are very, very excellent, proven head coaches. In some cases, or in Wade's case, proven at the power conference level. Odom hasn't been there, but I don't think there's much debate about the success that he's capable of having. But I think I like this Miami roster pretty much on par with some of those others. The depth, is a bit of more question mark, but I'm looking at a starting five that includes multiple power conference transfers in Ernest Uday, Malik Renault, and Trey Donaldson coming over from Michigan. It includes a top 30 freshman in the class in Shelton Henderson, a guy who was going to go to Duke, but ends up going to Miami after Coach Lucas took over. And then a guy in True Washington who comes from, since this seems to be a theme, New Mexico, transferring to Miami. He was a double-digit scorer last year for the Lobos, and now steps into that shooting guard role for the Canes. They got Marcus and Dante Allen both coming off the bench. Timotej Malovech is a good international player. Like, this is a roster that I think has enough juice to finish much higher in the ACC standings than I think people are giving them credit for. It's not going to be easy to upset NC State or Virginia. I think Florida State is more likely to be beat, although I have some optimism about Luke Laux as well. I just think that Jay Lucas is going to surprise some people with how effective of an X's and O's coach he is right away. And that, combined with what I believe to be a very talented roster where the pieces seem like they fit together really well, I could see this being a team that makes some serious noise and makes a push for the top 5 or 6 in the ACC, and potentially, if everything goes together according to plan, could end up being higher in the standings than NC State or Virginia.
Man, Andy, love it. Just for folks who might be wondering, like, how big and bold is this? The finishing ahead of Florida State is not shocking. The Noles picked 15th in the preseason poll. By the way, losing to Stanford on Saturday late night. On the football field, that was a thing. But Miami picked 8th in the ACC preseason poll, Virginia 5th, and NC State 4th. So as Andy said, definitely on those two fronts, quite a bold take. We just want to see these programs get back to who they are. So good to see Louisville do it last year. Really hope Miami can do this. Love this take, Andy. It's a lot of fun. And if all three of those teams are up in the top 6, 7 of the conference, I think that might say some good things for the short and long-term future of the ACC, which will be very interesting. All right, Andy, we got one more bold prediction each that we got to get to here. Coming up next from Andy, San Diego State gonna make some noise on their way out the Mountain West door. I'll let Andy tell you all about it coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Monarch, let's be honest. Most of us can't even name all our financial accounts, let alone what they're worth. Between 401ks and savings and investments, it's so easy to lose track, and that can mean you leave money on the table, and nobody wants to do that. That's why I started using Monarch, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch has helped me organize my accounts. It's helped me track my spending and get a better handle on all my investments without having to touch a spreadsheet. And even though I love a good spreadsheet, I love that. I also love that I can review everything with my wife. We do all our finances together, hand in hand, side by side. So I love that Monarch allows us to see shared goals, make financial decisions together. Monarch's visual dashboards and smart tools make it so much easier to understand where my money is going and how to make it work harder for me. Well, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarch.com for 50% off your first year. Again, that's monarch.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Andy, it's time to wrap up this year's bold predictions. I can't wait to see how they crash and burn miserably yet again, as they always do. Andy, what is going to be your third and final one for this season?
We're talking about the Aztecs of San Diego State. I think San Diego State is going to finish as a top 15 team in both the AP poll and at KenPom. And that may not seem incredibly bold for a team that's on the borderline of being a top 25 team, but it is something that we haven't really seen happen all of that often for San Diego State. And I don't think that this team is getting enough national attention for the fact that it's pretty realistic that they do finish in the top 15, top 20, maybe even top 10 in those categories. They've been a top 20 team in the AP poll, in the final AP poll of the season, in 4 of Brian Dutcher's 7 years. So that's a top 20 team. They've only actually been top 15 once. out of that time. I think they were 16th, 17th, and either 17th again or 18th the last couple of years. So they do end up usually finishing the season right around being a top 15 team in the AP poll. At KenPom, they were top 15 in 2020 and 2023. Obviously, 2020 was that phenomenal team that we did not get to see in the NCAA tournament because of COVID, and 2023 was the team that went to the national championship game. They were also top 25 in both 2022 and 2024. This team is getting overlooked despite the fact that they are returning three incredibly key, valuable players to this roster. The fact that they return Magoon Guath and Miles Byrd is unprecedented in the modern era of college basketball for a pro. I mean, we've spent most of this show talking about New Mexico losing JT Toppin and losing Donovan Dent and losing True Washington. And obviously San Diego State is a different animal than New Mexico, but it's in the same conference. And a player like Magoon Guath could have gone anywhere. He entered the transfer portal and the NBA draft process and chose not to pursue either of those, but to instead return to San Diego State. Miles Byrd was going to be selected in the 2025 NBA draft. It was like not a matter of if, it was where he was going to get picked. And he chose to return to San Diego State as well. Two incredibly gifted and talented players, elite on both sides of the ball, two of the best individual defenders in the sport. And then you also bring back a guy in Reese Waters who missed all of last year with an injury. And I mean, he came back and they played an exhibition game against UCLA, and San Diego State did lose the exhibition game. And you don't want to take results for exhibition games super seriously, but it is worth noting that Reese Waters dropped 19 in a game that San Diego State scored 60. By the way. So he had about 33% of their points. That's not necessarily a good thing for San Diego State, but Guath didn't play in that game, and Byrd played very little in that game, and Waters went out and hung 20, I think, against a good defensive team in UCLA. So I think Reese Waters is a X factor for this team that is maybe getting overlooked because he missed all of last season. I think you're going to see growth from their role players from last year, like Pharaoh Compton and Taj DeGorville and BJ Davis. They also bring in a guy in Sean Newman, who was fourth in the country in assists per game last year at La Tech. So they're bringing in a valuable facilitator, somebody who can space the floor, a nice outside shot as well. I think there's a lot of pieces that if they fit together well for this team, which they should, considering so many of them were on this roster last year, I think this team is the overwhelming best team in the Mountain West. Like, I don't think it's close, if we're being honest. And I think that they're going to win the league by a couple of games. They got some tough non-con games. They're playing Oregon and Michigan in the Players Era Festival. They got a non-con matchup against Arizona. I don't know that they win. I think they'll probably win at least one of those three games. I'm not sure if they win more than that, but the experience they get in those three matchups should allow them to put together a resume that's excellent and puts them in a position to be a top 15, maybe even top 10 team by the time March rolls around.
As things stand now, just to kind of give everyone context for Andy's prediction here, San Diego State begins the season 30th at KenPom and effectively 28th in the AP poll. They're third in the others receiving votes. And so would be basically cut in half where they are right now to finish top 15. Andy, that's a lot of fun. Would love to see San Diego State kind of stick it to the Mountain West on the way out the door, because it feels like the Mountain West has just been petty throughout this whole thing. That's me from the outside looking in, but whatever, that's fine. All right, Andy, last bold prediction of the season. There is so much noise. I'm giving context before I say it.
Do it.
There is so much noise around AJ DeBanza. And as well, there should be. This dude is phenomenal. As you said before we got going, he dropped like 30 the other night in a loss, by the way, at Nebraska. And there's a lot of good play. Rob Wright, all these guys, right? So much good stuff. We believe in Kevin Young. Think he's a great coach. But here's the bold take. BYU, who was picked second in the preseason Big 12 poll, is going to finish outside the top 5 in the Big 12 final standings. Andy, there's a couple of reasons for this. On the BYU side of it, I think this team is going to be absolutely elite offensively. I mean, it's just silly to even think that they might not be, right? Yes, Jaeger Damon's gone. We got a lot of that, but you add AJ DeBanza to what Richie Saunders already does, Rob Wright to run it all around, Keba Keita, all of that. They're going to be phenomenal offensively. I do think, however, that this team is going to struggle defensively, as we've seen with some other teams in recent years who have been elite offensively, struggled defensively. A couple of the Bama teams of recent years come to mind. Kentucky 2 years ago, things like that, Andy. UConn last year is another example of that. And so I think that is a factor in it. They're a little bit undersized in the front court, some of those things. So there's reason number one is the defensive, what I think will be defensive struggles. The other thing is that while the SEC has gotten all the love and all the talk in recent years, let's not forget just how loaded the Big 12 is. BYU is absolutely in that conversation, but they've got to contend with Houston and Texas Tech and Arizona and Iowa State and Kansas. Yep. And that's just to name 5 right there. And then whatever other random teams pop, because that's what happens in the portal era. And I'm not saying BYU can't and won't be in that conversation. I think so. But I just think those defensive struggles are going to be enough to put them behind the likes of Houston, Texas Tech, and 3 other schools in the Big 12. And I don't want that to necessarily be the case, but as good as AJ is dropping 30, he's not exactly like a world changer defensively, and neither are a lot of the other Cougars.
Yeah, I like this prediction. I think I wonder too if the novelty of Kevin Young's system will be, it certainly will be more predictable for opposing coaches to scheme against. Like they didn't have as much of a, now that he's been here for a while, like you're going to be more prepared for what he's trying to do. Obviously with a new look roster, and especially with a new player like Dybansa, they're going to do some different stuff. We know that, but I think that the teams in the conference and the coaches in the conference will be a bit more prepared for what BYU likes to do offensively. They may be more prepared for how to, how to go at them defensively as well. And I think that could, the difference between 2 and 6 in the Big 12 might not be very much. And again, Houston, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and Kansas in particular are teams that are going to be really, really dangerous in this league. I think Arizona is going to be very dangerous as well. That's 5 teams right there. And then who knows what you're going to get out of some teams like Cincinnati or Baylor or Kansas State. Again, I don't really expect any of those teams to be ahead of BYU necessarily, but
Cincinnati the idea that the other night,
the idea that those teams could easily beat BYU this year, like it doesn't mean that BYU again won't finish ahead of them, but I think it's very possible that BYU, somebody's going to finish outside the top 5 in the Big 12 and out of that kind of group of 6 teams. And whoever it is not a team that's expecting that at this point. Like all those teams think they're going to be a top 5 or even a top 3 team in the Big 12. Somebody's going to be 6th. Would not shock me if it's BYU because we can see where they have limitations on their roster. Keba Kaita, he could be the best rim protector on planet Earth, and that may not be enough to help with the limitations of the rest of that team defensively. And so I could very much see a reality where some of those teams are going to be able to exploit BYU on that end of the floor and pick up some W's. And again, that might be all it takes for BYU to finish lower in the standings than people are expecting.
All right, Andy, that wraps up the 25-26 bold predictions. Gang, we would love to hear from you. What bold predictions do you have for this season? Drop us a crazy one. We might even put a few on the show this week. Andy, get us out of here.
Well, for the first time in a while, we really shouldn't have to apologize to the Lawyer family like we so much like to do. I think if we're going to predict that you're going to be an integral part of your team winning a national championship, I don't know if apologies are necessary for Mr. Fletcher Lawyer in this case, but I will still get it to anyway. Apologies to the Lawyer family. We want to say cheers to the McBruins, especially after Isaac's very bold prediction about them. Let's go Wild Popes. Folks, we got some really fun stuff coming your way this week. 2 more of our team preview episodes. We're going to talk about some of these exhibition games as well. Got a conference preview coming your way on Friday. And then we're pretty much going to be starting to talk real basketball very, very soon. I cannot wait. Folks, want to thank you all again for listening. And of course, until next time, as always, peace out.